Welcome back, everyone. We've been looking at Muhammad's battles recently and come now to the year 630 and the Battle of Hunain. This battle is significant for at least two reasons. First, it's one of those battles that explodes another major Muslim apologetic narrative, namely that Muhammad only fought people who fought him first. You might be familiar with that argument if you are, say, a parent of a 5-year-old, but he hit me first. This is the Islamic golden rule: do unto others as they do unto you. This argument is arbitrary and ad hoc. Muslims will simply argue that no matter what Muhammad did to other people, they deserved it. They were just as bad or worse. To quote our hypothetical 5-year-old again, he hit me first. But the Battle of Hunain is one example of how this 5-year-old defense fails. At Hunain, we find Muhammad fighting other tribes to subdue them. The second reason this battle is so significant is that, as many of you know, we've been looking at these battles through a critical lens, adapting material from the most recent and thorough scholarly work on Muhammad's wars. In the book entitled Muhammad's Military Expeditions, Professor Ayman Ibrahim constantly draws attention to the way that Muslim historiographers composed and edited their accounts, shaping them for their purposes, which changed over time, of course. And the Battle of Hunain, to me, is the clearest and most interesting case I've encountered so far where Muslim authors, obviously, heavily manipulated their narratives. Let's review the high points of the Battle of Hunain before we go any further. These are summarized from Ibrahim's book. Muhammad fought against two major tribes or clans in this battle, the Hawazin and Thaqif. The location was around Al-Ta'if, that's southeast of Mecca. According to Muslim historians who aren't biased at all, it was the Hawazin and Thaqif, led by Malik ibn Auf an-Nasri, who prepared to attack Muhammad, intimidated by his recent conquest of Mecca. 12,000 Muslims, and I use that term loosely because Muhammad employed polytheists in his army in this battle, some of whom committed shirk, and Muhammad, staunch defender of pure monotheism, did absolutely nothing about it. 12,000 Muslims versus 20,000, 24,000, or more than 24,000, or an unknown number of non-Muslims, depending on which source you read. Before the battle, Malik's spies became petrified of all of the white men who came from the heavens, referring to Muhammad and his men. Speaking of white men, it's now a good time to bring up all of those hadith that talk about the whiteness of Muhammad's various body parts. I think I just did. Muhammad chose Khalid ibn al-Walid to lead his army. That's the faithful servant of Allah's messenger who killed a guy, cut his head off, boiled it in a stew, and then slept with his wife. That's what you call a busy day in Islam. But that behavior was not enough to exclude him from Muhammad's approval and use as commander not much later. The Muslims were arrogant because of their relatively large numbers. That's compared to prior battles. So Allah revealed Surah 925, saying that Allah deserved the credit. The other tribes initially seemed to win, causing the Muslims to flee, but the battle reversed course, thanks to Muhammad's bravery. As the battle turned to the Muslims' favor, terror gripped their enemies until Allah cast Islam in their hearts. This puzzling phrase quoted by Ibrahim is coming directly from Al-Waqidi. Now for the really fun part, let's see how the Muslim historiographers shaped their narratives. I've classified their alterations in the following ways: embellishment, Quran exegesis, religious history, and the Abbasid shift. So let's look at a few examples of each. First, embellishment, and recall that the Muslim army numbered 12,000, and recall as well the report from Malik's spies. Set aside any possible exaggeration of the battle's numbers. For now, it's the composition of the army that's important. Muhammad recruited Muslims, of course, but he also recruited polytheists and those who were forced to convert to Islam. Ibrahim comments, we should note that the 2,000 soldiers from Mecca, out of the 12,000 in the Muslim-led army, were presumably from those who accepted Islam on the day of the conquest of Mecca, who embraced Islam to save their lives and spare their families. And as we've also said, Muslim historians report that Muhammad relied on polytheists in his army. That's according to Waqidi. And Yaqubi states that Muhammad took to the battle Muslims who were converted voluntarily and involuntarily. Polytheists were so bad, they deserved to be forced into submission or killed. Also, Muhammad was happy to ally with them when necessary. That is how important winning is to Allah and His Messenger. And involuntary conversion to Islam? Well, if that wasn't in the Muslim sources, I'd never have believed it. Here's what I'm suggesting. Muhammad's army of shirk-committing polytheists and forced Muslims was a problem for Muslim historians, given the perfect monotheism of Islam, where further there is no compulsion in religion. Muhammad's composite army became an embarrassment, and so let's embellish it. Remember back to number 5, white men from heaven. Here's a fuller description of what we're supposed to believe the spies saw. We saw white men on piebald horses. Surely we do not fight people of the earth, but rather people from the heavens. Thus Muhammad's army of questionable characters is given a fearsome but heavenly veneer. His soldiers, even the forced converts and the pagans, appear angelic. It seems like embellishment to me. Ibrahim notes more signs of embellishment here, since we're expected to believe that the Muslims actually know what was said by the spies when they returned to their camp. That's not plausible. Also, remember I said to set aside any exaggeration about the army's numbers? Well, let's go back to that for another example of embellishment. Ibrahim comments, the Muslim sources invite us to believe that 12,000 Muslims, who were initially defeated by 24,000 unbelievers, turned the defeat into victory in one day, and with only 4 Muslims martyred. Muslims, you can believe those numbers if you want. I'm going with embellishment. The next category is Quranic exegesis. The notoriously vague Quran, filled with gaps. Isn't that a paradox? Filled with gaps. Anyway, those gaps are just begging to be filled in, and Muslim historiographers, well, they're happy to help. You will recall, of course, that Muslims were arrogant since they had the biggest army so far. So Surah 925 was revealed, giving Allah the credit. Certainly God has helped you on many battlefields, and on the day of Hunayn, when your multitude impressed you but was of no use to you at all, and the earth was too narrow for you, despite its breadth, and you turned back, retreating. The mention of Hunayn in this verse makes exegesis by later Muslim historiographers seem less spurious than in other examples. Nevertheless, details of what actually happened are lacking as usual. But Ibrahim notes some additional issues with this exegesis by historiography. In a competing account, we are told the boastful statement is actually attributed not to prideful and boastful Muslims, but to Muhammad himself. When he saw the great number of soldiers accompanying him, he exclaimed, "We shall not be defeated today from a few." While the two competing reports exist in the same pool of traditions, it appears that an earlier memory of Muhammad's voicing the statement did not appeal to traditionists. Consequently, they tweaked it by creating a rival account to avoid placing Muhammad in a dark light, since the Quran presumably questions the boastful believers. This is evident in the fact that a third competing report emerged, claiming that the statement came from Abu Bakr. Thus, we are invited to believe that the boastful statement was said, but no one knows precisely by whom. The point seems to be more about filling in the gaps in the Quran with something. Even multiple conflicting reports will do just fine. Keep that in mind whenever you use Muslim commentaries to interpret the Quran. Now recall that due to Muhammad's bravery, the battle reversed course. Let's look at some examples of religious history. Back to Ibrahim, Muslim storytellers, as religious scholars, insist that the Muslim victory occurred after Muhammad performed a miracle. He threw pebbles at the unbelievers, saying, "Defeat them by the Lord of the Kaaba." This hurt the eyes of the unbelievers. But moreover, we are told that a divine intervention came in the form of squadron upon squadron of angels, shining like white men on piebald horses, and wearing red turbans that fell down between their shoulders, between the heaven and the earth. These angels were distinguished from those who appeared at the Battle of Badr. At that time, they were wearing white turbans. Still, some traditionists assure us that these angels, unlike the case at Badr, were not sent to fight, but mainly to exhort the believers. And as we have heard before, it was Allah who actually defeated the enemies. He cast terror, somehow synonymous with casting Islam, into their hearts. Well, that's a lot of religious history for sure, but what would non-religious history look like, say in terms of the motivation for such a battle? Well, ironically, Muslim storytellers give us that as well. Other reports indicate that Muhammad encouraged his soldiers to remain in the battle by incentivizing them that if a Muslim kills an unbeliever, his booty belongs to him. Now that actually sounds more believable, especially since the spoils from the battle were reportedly fought over quite aggressively by Muhammad's men. Also, after Muhammad finally gained control over all of it, he used some of it to bribe certain eminent figures to accept Islam. No wonder this account needed a good coating of religious history. In my opinion, however, the Muslim authors spread it on just a little bit too thick. Finally, let's look at the Abbasid shift. This is worth quoting at length. Since traditionists never relinquish their commitment to their sectarian or political views, the Abbasid area historians seem to insist on inserting literary elements to magnify the role of Al-Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, the ancestor of the Abbasid dynasty, in the victory. When Muhammad wanted to cause confusion and disarray among the unbelievers, we are told he asked Al-Abbas, "Give me some pebbles." Al-Abbas brought pebbles from the ground. Then Muhammad threw them at the faces of the polytheists, saying, "Disgrace them, be defeated by the Lord of the Kaaba." The report invites us to consider that Muhammad did not pick the pebbles himself, but relied on Al-Abbas, who is portrayed as a devotee to Muhammad, a contributor to the miracle and to the victory. This is clearly a pro-Abbasid account, especially if we compare it to the pre-Abbasid account attributed to al-Zuhri, in which Muhammad did not rely on al-Abbas but simply grabbed a handful of small stones and cast them into the faces of the infidels. The pro-Umayyad al-Zuhri did not seem to find it necessary to include al-Abbas in the miracle preceding the victory. It appears that the Abbasid historians seize any opportunity to design reports that esteem their progenitor, al-Abbas, and emphasize him as a strong supporter of Muhammad. In the same vein, these historians aim to degrade key Umayyad figures and depict them as weak and untrue Muslims. In this video, we reviewed the high points of the Battle of Hunain and also looked at 4 ways that Muslim historiographers shaped their narratives: embellishment, Quran exegesis, religious history, Abbasid shift, and we looked at some examples of each. As you can see, this sort of analysis helps us get closer to understanding how Muslim authors shaped their narratives. But as you can also see, it really doesn't help us get any closer to understanding what, if anything, actually happened. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.